Okay, so I just wanted to show you, this is a picture of J.P. Morgan. And remember, his industry is the banking industry, okay? And he was known for like buying out maybe struggling businesses and just like really investing and turning those businesses around. And that's how he just kept on getting more and more money. So just remember, steel guy, Carnegie, oil guy, Rockefeller, banking guy, J.P. Morgan, and then railroad guys, Cornelius Vanderbilt, then Jay Gould. Got it? Okay. And like I said, he would do a lot of merges and take them over, just business stuff. We talked about Taylorism. We'll get to mass production later. We talked about the New South. Okay, here we go. So we are now, I think, do y'all have like a little chart that it's after Southern Mill Economy, and it says social alternatives, Roman numeral 6. Do y'all have that? Okay. So just note, there are going to be some people who will defend this wealth. Okay. There will be some people who are like, no, like these people are so wealthy because they're exploiting their workers, and we need the government to get involved. Think socialism. Okay. So there's lots of different types of people viewing this wealth. Okay. So with laissez-faire and capitalism, okay, y'all should be familiar with Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, right? Okay, and he said that the government should not regulate businesses. What did he say naturally should? It's like a term. Oh, it's underneath where it says Southern Mill Economy. It's not necessarily a chart, but there's boxes. Do you see that? Let me see if this is blurry. Okay, y'all don't have that one. Okay, no worries. Just note, I just want to point out, so yeah, it might be a different version, but it's okay. It's okay. It's just like how I arranged it. So with laissez-faire, this is the idea that the government should not interfere. Okay, this derives from Adam Smith, who wrote The Wealth of Nations, which was actually in 1776. So think like when he wrote it, the context was like mercantilism and like all those, enforcing of things should not have happened. And what he says is that instead of the government regulating the economy and, prices and all that kind of stuff and businesses, he says it's called the invisible hand, which basically means your natural supply and demand. Okay, that it naturally will happen. We don't need the government to interfere. And so a lot of people like Rockefeller and Carnegie, they're going to like this, Adam Smith, laissez-faire approach. Okay. And even Vanderbilt. Okay. They'll use that to kind of justify their wealth. They also, though, the idea of, Darwinism. Y'all know that Charles Darwin talked about evolution. Okay. And the fittest will survive. Well, later, Herbert Spencer will apply that like species survival thing and says, you know what? It's not just animals and evolution. You also can apply it to the marketplace and business, okay? And that is where we get the idea of social Darwinism, okay? So you had Charles Darwin, and then Herbert Spencer's like, hey, social Darwinism, you can apply what Darwin talked about to business and the marketplace and businesses, okay? Let's see. All right. Also, there'll be some personal initiative. Just the idea that if you work really hard, like with maybe a little bit of luck, you can strike it rich, and we'll talk about that. And then the opposite of so again, laissez-faire just means like what degree does the government have? And that means no degree, like hands off, okay? Social Darwinism, think of it as like businesses, it's not about government intervention. This is just justifying wealth in the sense of the better businesses survived. The ones that didn't survive made foolish mistakes, basically. They were weak. Survival of the fittest in the marketplace. Now, the opposite of those will be socialism, okay? You will see socialism will start to pop up in America during this time, during the Gilded Age. And it's all about the wealth of these robber barons or captains of industry, these titans. And that if you're a socialist, you're going to criticize that huge gap, the disparity between the really rich people and the really poor people, okay? And you're going to call for the government to get involved to make that gap smaller. And what you usually do is if you tax people more, if you tax businesses more and you give it to the poor, that's making that gap smaller. And that's socialism, okay, where the government's going to be heavily involved, okay? So are y'all Roman numeral 6, social alternatives, social thinkers as they analyze or criticize the Industrial Revolution? Is that what y'all says? Maybe say, yeah, something. What does it say? Where are y'all? Okay. So have y'all gotten, hold on. Let me just see. Okay. So I'm first going to talk about there's a laissez-faire thing with Carnegie. Carnegie is going to, he does like laissez-faire, hands off, okay? He's going to write a publication called The Gospel of Wealth. Make sure you know that. Sometimes it's called The Gospel of Success, okay? And remember how I told you how he said that, like, if you are rich, you have a moral responsibility to help the poor around you? That is from The Gospel of Wealth, okay? So Carnegie wrote it and believed it. The publication that he wrote is called The Gospel of Wealth. Okay, sometimes it's just called On Wealth, but it's the idea of wealth. If you have it, you owe it to the poor to provide it to them too, but not through direct handouts. Okay, another person, you have a guy named Horatio Alger. Do y'all see that person? Okay, Horatio Alger. This is kind of like that. He's not a socialist, okay? This is more of that rags to riches, all of us can strike it rich, okay? He was a dime novelist, okay? Why? It's just like the penny press. Why would he want to make his novels dirt cheap, cost a dime? Because he wants to make sure the poorest of the poor could even afford to read these books. And all these books were about individual children who, with hard work, became rich. So it maybe would encourage them to work hard and they could achieve social mobility too. Okay. And he had over 100 novels and they all were about the same. Poor guy, hard work, becomes rich guy. Okay. It's going to really reach that out. And there's like one of my favorite TV shows that I've seen was Boardwalk Empire. That's, I think it's like Showtime or HBO. But like one of the bootleggers is like really, really wealthy in Atlantic City. And like there's like a little thing where he's like sitting at his desk and he like pulls out his top drawer at his desk and it's his copy of Horatio Alger's little novel that he read. So it just tells you that he was inspired to like make it rich. Okay. And his most famous novel was about a poor boy named Richard, okay? And I kid you not, okay? Yeah, Acacia, you're right. I'm going to take that off. But I kid you not, it is what it is. The name of this book is called Ragged Dick. Just, there you go. Poor Richard, basically, is what it's talking about, but you've got to go with that, okay? So now we're going to talk about social Darwinism, okay? There's a professor who is all about social Darwinism, and his name is William Graham Sumner, okay? And he wrote something called What the Social Classes Owe Each Other, meaning like what does the rich owe the poor, all that kind of stuff. And his answer is absolutely nothing. The rich are rich because they were smart and made the right decisions. The poor are poor because they made foolish decisions. That's a social Darwinist, okay? So make sure you know that. And the implication that government should leave businesses alone. He believes like if you're a foolish business making foolish mistakes, the government shouldn't help you out because you're going to continue to make foolish mistakes. That's what William Graham Sumner is thinking, okay? And people like Carnegie and Rockefeller, They believe that, wealth only needs to be in the hands of a few because they are the ones providing jobs and they're the ones who will survive. Okay. Now, the opposite of William Graham Sumner would be a socialist. Okay. So just note that the Marxists, Karl Marx, the Marxist-oriented Socialist Labor Party is established during this time. So socialism is around in America. Okay. There's a guy named Henry George. And if there's one socialist, you got to know, if I had to say there's one, it's this guy. Henry George wrote Progress and Poverty. And you can see here, it actually is full. It says Progress and Poverty, an inquiry into the cause of industrial depressions and of increase of want with increase of wealth. The remedy. What's the remedy mean? What does that mean? A remedy. Solution. Okay. And what his solution is redistribute wealth, which that is socialism. Okay. So the rich are really rich and the poor are getting poor, and the rich are getting rich at the expense of the poor. And what he is saying is we need to redistribute that wealth. And how do you redistribute wealth? Taxes. We need to really tax the rich so the tax revenue will be spent on the poor. That is what Henry George is talking about. Okay. And again, this single tax and capital gains, meaning when you, inheritance tax, when, someone dies and they leave you something, tax that heavily, and that tax money will go to the poor. That kind of stuff. You redistribute wealth. That is Henry George, who wants heavy government intervention. Another socialist is Edward Bellamy. And he wrote Looking Backward. Okay? And the context of this is that he had a dream that he woke up in the year 2000. And America was a utopia. America was a utopia because socialism was the government in America. Everyone was equal because the government redistributed the wealth. And from that dream, he will be influenced to write about socialism and redistributing wealth and all that kind of stuff. So that's kind of interesting. Okay. Lester Ward, you don't have to know him. I mean, he is a socialist, but Henry George is number one socialist, and then Edward Bellamy is number two socialist. Okay. All right. And you can see here, just note also, Jacob Reese, we'll talk about him a little bit later, but in 1890, okay, it will really be published in 1890. He was a photographer, a photojournalist. So he wrote and, took photos, and he went into the New York slums and showed people through his pictures how poor the poor were. Okay, these are his actual photos. So people were like, good God, when you see those children, you know what I'm saying? It's what can we do? Government needs to get involved. Okay. So I'm not saying he was a socialist, but he exposed how the poor were. Okay. One more thing here, and this is not socialism. This is just another random thing. Russell H. Conwell. He was a preacher who will go on the radio and will really, a lot of his famous speeches will be, on the radio. And his most famous speech is called Acres of Diamonds. Okay. And it's a story about a very poor farmer who worked really, really hard and never gave up. Okay. And one day when he's tilling the land and digging, he strikes it rich and he finds acres of diamonds in his yard, basically. It's the idea of that hard work and perseverance and a little bit of luck, he could strike it rich, or anyone could strike it rich. Because again, if he gave up, he would have never discovered the acres of diamonds. Okay. Any questions? So I kind of think of Horatio Alger and Russell Conwell are very similar in hey, work hard, work hard, work hard. We are not, Molly. We are not, but we will have a test, and I'll get to that in a little bit. Okay, so now are we on labor unions? Okay. Oh, and you can see here, look at this wealth. Okay, this is based off of 2018 numbers. Okay, Andrew Carnegie. This is equivalent to like what his money was when he owned his company, but we're going to encourage like inflation and adjust things. $101 billion. Okay, Rockefeller, $253 billion. Vanderbilt, $205 billion. Okay, let's see. And like James Buchanan Duke, remember I told you about the American Tobacco Company? Like that's Duke University. Okay, a lot of them did give back in some form or fashion. Yeah, and then like Andrew Mellon, $63 billion. Okay, it's just so hard to grasp. We talked about social Darwinism and William Graham Sumner. We talked about Horatio Alger, the rags to riches stories. There's the Gospel of Wealth with Andrew Carnegie. Okay. All right, so now let's just give you a brief overview of wages and working conditions in America. Okay. Average work week, 60 hours. Okay. Just so you know, like for me, technically I get paid for 40 hours a week. Okay. This is 60 hours a week. So it was about 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Usually Sunday was the day off. Okay. Most laborers will live below the poverty level. The poverty level means if you are below it, that means you are not making enough for basic needs. Okay. No job security, no workers' compensation. If a worker got hurt, even if it was like the machine's fault, the worker got fired. Why? Because there were first of all, the government didn't have any rules about that. And then there's so many people. There are blocks of people waiting for a job. So it's like, hey, you're fired, you're hired kind of thing. Okay. Very, very unsafe. Some places and a lot of places in factories, they would actually lock you in your rooms. Like it's the equivalent of like we were locked from the outside. So like we'd have to be in here working the whole time. Okay. Yeah, lots of crazy stuff. Repetitive tasks because that one person's doing the same thing 10 hours a day, 6 days a week. Because they're unskilled. They don't know how to do they're not artisans. They don't know how to make the whole product, just one thing. Okay. And it'd be 10 to 12 hour days. Average though is 10 days. Okay. A lot of things, remember there's no ventilation. And so especially things like brown lung and textiles with like fibers get into your, you aspirate into your lungs and you get pneumonia that way. Black lung would be like from the coal mines. Okay. And remember I told you how children and women labor mostly in the textile industry. Women tended to, if you were a woman and you worked in factories, it usually dealt with like canning food, textiles, very like domestic industry. Okay. So things are really bad. And again, there's no benefits, vacation days, sick leave, health insurance, workers' compensation, retirement plans. None of that is around. Okay. And, wages, basically, the wages, people are saying, hey, make them real wages, meaning like increase it. So the cost of living is going up, increase your wages to reflect that. And a lot of owners were like, no. Okay. So you can see the cost of living in the Gilded Age. Okay. Long story short from this, the average annual spending was $755 back then. So remember, inflation has really gone up since, 1901. Okay. Then the average annual expenditures of just we're talking your basic stuff, is $574. But if you saw, most workers made between $400 and $500 a year. That's probably not enough to cover this. Okay. But a lot of people are going to be spending on like other things that aren't as important during this time as well, because you have all those products like a camera and a razor. Okay. Labor conditions, and here's a picture here. I already talked about this, but I mean it's just overly crowded. No such thing as like safety requirements. Okay. In 1882, it was an average of 675 workers were killed each week due to like malfunctions of the machinery. Okay. There's nothing like given to the families because the machine messed up. There's nothing like that. Okay. And here's child labor. A lot of people, social reformers, believe that this was the greatest sin of the Gilded Age, because the children are going to probably get paid way less, and they're going to do the sketchier things. Okay. Here's a thing. This is like they're working here. A lot of them were so small that they'd be the perfect people to have to go down deep into coal mines. Okay. Here's a very famous photo by Lewis Hine. These are children. This is it's a textile mill, but these are like think thread and yarn. They're called a bobbin. That's like a spindle. Does that make sense? And their job was, as these things are moving up and down, they're barefoot. Okay. They are to climb up to the top and replace with a new thread before it runs out, so you have to stop everything. Can you imagine, like, if you're sneezing or slip or something, your foot's going to get cut off and you're going to get fired now. Okay. It's really bad. And again, also there's the newsies, if you will. A lot of, it's down right here, they would stand in the street corners and they would have, you couldn't, like today when you go to the grocery store, you can kind of like open up a magazine and stuff and be like, oh, okay, I don't need to buy this. Then it was just like they'd be at the street corner and all it was based off the headline. So that headline better be good, okay? And you could buy it for about a nickel then, okay? That's what, I guess, a safer route, but that's not saying much. In 1870, 1 out of every 8 children worked and then by 1900, 1 out of every 5, okay? And so again, a lot of people say this is the greatest sin of the Gilded Age. Okay, now let's talk about labor unions. Remember we talked about this prior to the Civil War. Labor unions did exist. Remember they were first called the Working Men's Party. Remember that? And you had Commonwealth versus Hunt, which said labor unions can't exist. Remember that? Okay, so they existed before the Civil War, but they're really going to get more involved after the Civil War. Okay. And again, with labor unions, this is not a new idea. The purpose was to promote worker solidarity to come together for change, usually better working conditions, whether it's pay or like safety stuff. Okay. Why would we need more and more labor unions after the Civil War? Because management is going to have so much power because there's a surplus of labor. Remember I told you, there are a lot of immigrants, okay, and even some African Americans who are lined up for blocks next to most factories waiting for a job because they know for whatever reason they can fire someone. It's like, okay, you're next, okay? The management, the owners, they can do what they want because there are people who are willing to, there's an extra amount of workers who want a job. So let's talk about the first national labor union, okay? And it was established in 1866, so a year after the Civil War. And it is the first attempt to organize all workers in all states, okay? What tends to happen when it's like a first on a national level, it's not going to be that effective because it's like trial and error and all that kind of stuff. It was not tied to any specific skill. Some labor unions, it's just about like a certain industry. This was like, no, any worker. Okay, it was organized by William Silvis, and don't worry too much about that. Fill it out, but I'm not going to like probably ask you that on the test. What they wanted, and this is what most labor unions wanted, instead of a 10-hour workday, they wanted an 8-hour workday. That's how it is for me. Okay, they also wanted to end child labor. Yes, they felt bad for children, but they also knew that as long as child labor is around, there's going to be a surplus of workers. Okay, they want to stop immigration. Same thing. There's so many immigrants, especially the Chinese, coming to America, and the management of the owners can do whatever they want because there's all these immigrants waiting to get a job. Okay, Silvis will include women to strengthen the platform. It's like, hey, let's include women in this labor union because more members, more strength. Okay. No African Americans were included here. They did say, hey, get your own, have your own. That we support you to have your own, you know, district, your own group of the National Labor Union for African Americans, but not our National Labor Union. Okay. It will die out. Silvis will die. And remember, just like the Whig Party, when the founder dies out, it kind of can die out. And the Panic of 1873 there's like bigger problems. Okay. Any questions there? Next, we have the Knights of Labor. This is established by Uriah Stevens. There you go. But the person you really need to know is the guy who took it to the next level. Okay. Just note it was open to all who toiled, meaning all who worked, except lawyers, doctors. Okay. So again, if you worked but you weren't a lawyer or a doctor, or liquor dealers, okay, you could join this. Okay, it was secret at first. Under Uriah Stevens, it was secretive. But again, if it's a secretive organization, it's not going to be too powerful. Okay, so then what's going to happen? And their issues, they wanted to restrict child labor. They wanted a graduated income tax. What does that mean, a graduated income tax? Yes, but it's based off of how much you make. So like today, we have a graduated income tax in America, okay? And so you make more money, you pay more in taxes, okay? So they said, hey, we are workers and we're probably not getting paid much. Shouldn't people like Vanderbilt pay more than what we have to in taxes? That's what it means by graduated income tax, okay? They want better pay for workers. They wanted co-ownership of some factories, meaning like allow us to buy stock, okay? They opposed wage cuts, work speed ups, and unsafe conditions, okay? They did not want the Catholic members of the Catholic Church. Remember, most not most, but like Irish immigrants tend to be part of the Catholic Church. So if you say, hey, if you're Catholic, you can't join, it's in a way saying immigrants, you can't join. Okay, there will be new leadership, and this is the guy you need to know, Terence Powderly. Okay, he is the one that says, look, let's invite Catholics. Let's not make this secretive. Let's have more people in here. So let's get rid of all the secrets. Okay, he supported temperance on the job. He did also welcome African Americans and women. Again, more numbers, more strength. Okay. And again, they definitely wanted some type of ban, not just on immigration, on Chinese immigration. And we will have an act in 1882 that will ban that. Okay. The last group to talk about is the AFL. Technically, the AFL is still around today in some form or fashion. It was established in 1881. And what's going to happen is that, remember how I told you how the Knights of Labor, it was like most workers could join it? There was a group in there who was like, look, we're skilled workers. We know how to make every step of the product. We are more valuable. We should break away from the Knights of Labor and have our own union for any skilled worker. Because think about it, if you're a skilled worker, you should be able to demand more and actually get it because you know how to make every step of the product, okay? And so that's how we get the American Federation of Labor, and it is for skilled workers. It did exclude women, because think about it, women usually weren't skilled workers, okay? And their biggest reasoning is skilled workers cannot be easily replaced. You can't just say, hey, you're fired if that one person knows how to do every little thing. If it was just one little skill, okay, but he knows how to do that whole product, okay? And again, it was the AFL, American Federation of Labor, and inside of like an umbrella, it had different skills, okay? The founder and president until like 1924, okay, is Samuel Gompers. You do have, like, this guy is like the most important of all the different ones, okay? And what was his skill? He was a cigar maker. Okay. And he really, his issues, first thing that blank is collective bargaining, and I'll get to that in a second. But what's really important is the other one that has quotation marks, bread and butter issues. Think about it. Does this mention higher wages? Okay, higher wages, 8-hour workday, safer working conditions, and child labor laws. Is it as like nitpicky as the Knights of Labor who were like, ban the Chinese? No. These are your basic, simple things that all workers should want, right? And that's why we're called bread and butter, because you ever heard that's the bread and butter, meaning like your basic wants or needs. Okay. Now, collective bargaining. This is really important. Think bargaining like you're trying to come up with an agreement and work a deal. Okay. This is where a labor union representative could request to meet with a factory owner to discuss some type of working agreement out. That's called collective bargaining. So that was like their big thing. They're like, look, we want to have collective bargaining protected and encouraged by most factory owners, so we can have that ability. Sometimes you just have to have that conversation, right, to work out a deal. Okay, and tactic for change. They weren't too radical, but go on strike if necessary. Okay, the last thing we're talking about today. Okay, let's see. Employer tactics to try to water down the power of unions. Okay, want to first point out that, labor unions, a lot of them will go on strike. They'll just stop working. They also sometimes what's called a slowdown, where you will work slower, so you're not producing as much. Okay, there's different ways, okay, for these workers to get their way or protest. Now let's talk about what factory owners or employers could do to weaken the power of labor unions. One is a lockout. That is where you close the factory. Now, while it might suck because it's like you just close them, there's a risk as a factory owner you're not going to make anything that day. Well, it's one of those things where it's like, no, you're not going to go on strike. We're shutting down the factory so you don't have the opportunity to come work for us. Sometimes they would close it down and then invite some substitutes to work that day, so at least something would happen. Okay, you had a blacklist. Okay, this is basically the don't hire list. So if there was some radical worker labor union member who just, kept on causing trouble for the factory owner, they might fire them and then let different factory owners know in an area, like, don't hire this person. He's been blacklisted. Okay, the next one is something called a yellow dog contract. Okay, basically when you would get a contract for your job, there could, in a yellow dog contract, there'd be a stipulation that says, hey, part of your employment is dependent on you not joining a union. So if someone found out that you signed this yellow dog contract and you were part of a union, you were fired. Okay. Also, as a condition of being hired or employed, sometimes they would hire private guards. Usually they were Pinkertons. Okay. So that right there, Pinkertons with a random S. Pinkerton agents. These are people who might act like a mole, who would like maybe work alongside workers to hear if there's some rumblings of a strike going on, or when they would close the factory in a lockout, they might stand guard so those substitutes can come in, and the Pinkertons would protect those subs for that day. Okay. Also, sometimes they would call in state troops to put down strikes. And then sometimes people like governors and presidents could issue a court injunction. A court injunction would be a piece of paper that orders you. It's kind of like cease and desist, that kind of stuff. Like, we order you not to do this. So it's like a court injunction that says, look, the courts have said stop the strike or stop whatever you're doing. And then if they don't, if the workers refuse to honor this, that is when they send the troops in to use force to put down the strike. Got it? Okay. We just have the last thing for chapter 18 has to deal with actual strikes. I think there are 4 strikes you have to know about. We will go over that in class Monday. Okay. I'm going to do a post about the test. You do not have a quiz on chapter 18 at all. Okay. But I'll do a post about your test. It's either going to be Tuesday or Wednesday. I'll let you know before class is over. There is one individual assignment, and that's it. Okay. There is a document you'll see in a second, and I don't care. Just pick one. You pick. There's 4 different strikes. Y'all pick one. Okay, one per group, and there's multiple. I mean, I feel like if there's like 11 people, like 11 different groups or whatever, there's only 4. I know everyone's not going to do this first one. You get what I'm saying? It's all good. But basically, you're going to click on the link and research what I said, fill out a little chart, submit one per group, and then one person will need a little storyboard. Don't use lots of words. Just make it very basic. And then we'll go over the strikes Monday. We'll be finished with 18. Got it? Okay. Let me post this thing. Okay, I just assigned it.